morning. We're reconvening in regular session. Let the record show all board members are present. And we had one executive session item. Counselor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 1 on the addendum is an executive session relating to potential litigation addressing the applicability of the outdoor lighting code to the proposed Rosemont Line site. County Attorney's Office recommends acceptance of the discussed tolling agreement and seeks direction from the board on this issue.
What's the pleasure of the board? Supervisor Valadez.
Proceed as we discussed in the executive session.
Motion and a second to proceed as we discussed in executive session on the tolling agreement. Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Returning to the regular agenda, Board of Supervisors sitting as other boards. The Library District Board, item 8, it's an award of a contract. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Miller.
I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. We now move on to the Board of Supervisors sitting as the Board of Supervisors in approval of the consent calendar. These are here. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us on any item as it relates to the consent calendar at this point? Hearing none, seeing nobody come forward, what's the pleasure of the board on the consent calendar?
I'll move approval, Madam Chair.
Of the consent in its entirety?
Yes.
Is there a motion and a second to approve consent in its entirety? And a miracle has happened on St. Patrick's Day. If you believe in miracles. There's a motion and a second to approve consent in its entirety. Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 10, in real property and resolution 2015-15, designating the Trails End and Robles Pass parcels recently acquired from the Arizona State Land Department as part of the Pima County Park System. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Elias.
I'll move item 10, including resolution 2015-15.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve item 10 in Reso 2015-15. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. We move on to hearings. Item 11 has been removed. The item has been resolved and the item has been removed from the agenda. We now move on to franchises, license permits. Items 12 through 18. With items 13, 14, and 15 having sheriff reports attached. These are hearings. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to, Leo, it looks like, is it G-A-R-E? Are you here? Leo?
Garcia?
Oh yeah, that is Garcia, thank you. No, don't need to speak, okay.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Elias.
seeing no one come forward to address us on these items, I move to close public hearings and approve items 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18.
Second.
With the note about the sheriff's report on 13, 14, and 15.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion and a second. Any objections? There's no objections. Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to development services, items 19. It's a hearing type 2 conditional use for solar farm, P21-14-002. What's the pleasure of the board on this item? Do you wish a staff report? Staff report? Staff report.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Valadez, members of the board, this is a type 2 conditional use permit request for the expansion of an existing solar power plant. The existing power plant was approved under a prior conditional use permit by the board in November of 2013. That was constructed. This is an expansion phase that would add another 21.5 megawatts of photovoltaic power to the existing facility. We had no public comment at our public hearing on this item. The hearing administrator's recommendation is for approval, subject to standard and special conditions Special conditions just deal with various particulars of the site, including the height of the solar panels, the dealing with the entry drive in the event that the Board of Supervisors ultimately adopts a Sonoran corridor, and other particulars related to the project design. I would be glad to answer any questions the board may have, but that would conclude my staff report.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Carroll.
Madam Chair, I realize this is in District 2 on the list. I have a question regarding, is there a rep from Asarco or Avalon Solar?
There is someone, he will speak as needed.
Okay, thank you very much.
What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Valdez.
move we close the public hearing and approve item 19, P21-14-022.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 20, hearing zoning code text amendment, stormwater harvesting system zoning code amendment, CO8-14-01, staff report.
Madam Chair, members of the board, good morning. This is CO8-14-01. This is a text amendment to the Pima County zoning code to allow for the use of stormwater harvesting systems. This will complement the rainwater harvesting system text amendment that was approved by the board last year. The text amendment will provide definitions and standardized terminology through the zoning code for the use of stormwater harvesting systems. The amendment will provide general guidance and regulation for use of the systems and provide incentives for the voluntary use of stormwater harvesting systems in landscaped off-street parking areas and landscape buffer yards. Staff has received no public comment on the zoning code text amendment. The Planning and Zoning Commission and staff recommend approval of the proposed zoning code text amendment. This concludes my staff report.
Thank you. What's the pleasure? Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us? I have no speaker cards. Supervisor.
Again, seeing no one come forward to address us on this public hearing, at this public hearing, I move approval of item 20, and that's case number CO8-14-01 Storm Harvesting System Zoning Code Amendment.
Second.
And close public hearing and if approved, pass and adopt ordinance 2015-7.
Yeah, I meant to include that, but I did close public.
You did now, right? You did now?
Whatever, that's fine.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Moving on to item 21, hearing rezoning, CO9-1409, Lin Hong and Chi Hua Wu Revocable Trust, West River Road rezoning. What's pleasure? Staff report.
Madam Chair, members of the board, before you is a request to rezone approximately 2.3 acres from CR4 to the CB1 zone for an eastward expansion of the existing shopping center located at the northeast corner of River and Oracle Road. To date, staff has received no written comment. There was one speaker at the commission, a property owner to the east, who was supportive of the request. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval with standard and special conditions. Staff is also recommending approval with standard and special conditions, mainly because this is very much an infill site, is generally in keeping with the comprehensive plan policies that were established for this site, and is compatible with surrounding land uses. The property additionally is located outside the Naveen Marie Behan Conservation Land System. And with that, that concludes the staff's report.
Thank you. And I understand there was some issues, and we have the representative here as it relates to ADOT. Did you want to address that?
Yes, if I could for just a minute.
And identify yourself for the record.
Paul Oland with WLB, representing the property owner and the applicant.
It's more than a second. Just saying.
There we go. that good? Okay, Paul Oland, WLB again. Just taking a very quick moment here to go over what we're proposing here. This is Oracle Road over here, this is River Road down here. The application pertains to this colored portion of the property. This is the existing shopping center there. There's a Denny's and an Audio Express and a Pet Foods and some other stuff. The applicant is also controls this portion of the shopping center, but not the Denny's portion, which is critical to the conversation. What we're proposing here is an expansion of the shopping center. There's going to be a cross-access for vehicles between these two parcels here. Also, obviously, pedestrian cross-access. This existing shopping center is already approved for renovation. It's up to a 36-foot height, which is in keeping with where it's at. So we're proposing the 30 feet there, which is what P&Z recommended. All architecturally integrated, of course. Just real quick, I'll get to ADOT, but this is roughly what we're thinking here. Pretty new design, and again, the whole shopping center will be upgraded at the same time. Well, it'll all be renovated, it'll probably be phased, but uses that we're proposing are as allowed in CB1, which is going to fulfill that regional policy, 122, and then some medical uses could also be allowed in their urgent care, physical therapy, dentist, eye doctor, stuff like that. The access improvements, really getting to it, that's become the biggest issue on this case, both because we have River Road, Oracle Road, we have Pima County, City of Tucson, and ADOT all weighing in on the traffic side of things. So on River Road, what we'll be doing, there's an existing curb cut here and here, and there's actually one here too. It just doesn't lead to anything. We'll be moving this one over and closing this. So the net result is an expansion of the shopping center without adding additional curb cuts on River. We'll also be extending the right turn lane over here to the existing road over here that serves a small subdivision to the north. We're a little bit uncomfortable with the condition requiring access over to there. That was one of the things that the neighborhood brought up during the comp plan amendment, that they were not going to be supportive of. But from ADOT's standpoint, that's really the biggest issue. There's an existing curb cut right here, leads into the Denny's portion. There's an existing bus stop that's just been improved here.
And that's along Oracle.
Yes, ma'am. So ADOT has suggested that we need to move this curb cut up to here. We don't own the property, we cannot do it. And Denny's has actually written us saying they're not supportive of that, and they're not going to go along with that either. So the bus stop, you can't get the right amount of right turn lane in here anyway. So this really just needs to stay as a grandfathered existing condition. The access is getting improved with the expansion and integration down here. So what we propose is to strike condition 3C because it's just too general and unenforceable. And then 3A, it currently says a TIA shall be submitted for review and approval by the county DOT. Offsite improvements determined necessary as a result of the TIA shall be provided by the property owner developer. What we'd like to add is subject to the approval by Pima County, City of Tucson, and ADOT as appropriate. So that kind of gets ADOT back into the picture and allows us to comfortably strike 3C. And then also say the developer shall not be required to modify driveway access from Oracle Road on the adjacent property to the west, and said access shall be considered grandfathered existing condition. Just as a side note, this portion of Oracle Road is actually maintained by the City of Tucson through an IGA with ADOT. So it all gets very messy, but I think what we've proposed here works well and is doable. So.
And then you're going to, so you want to add that language to 3A, and then you're deleting 3C?
Yes, ma'am.
And then, so then 3D becomes 3C, and 3E becomes 3D?
Yes, they work their way up, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Elias.
could we have a look at that map so we could see some more detail? Because we can't really see anything on that in terms of what's existing there at that bus stop. I'd like to see it. I just asked him how long the length was from the beginning of that intersection to the end of that bus stop. He said it's about 180 feet, just so the public knows, that's what I asked him.
And so I'd be happy to answer any questions related to that.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Miller?
I'd like to ask staff if they're amenable to that language change and the deletion of condition 3C.
Sure. Madam Chair, Supervisor Miller, yeah, I think generally staff is in support of that change, but I'd also like to point out that we do have another condition that will help with that situation, and that is adherence to the proposed preliminary development plan. On that same preliminary development plan, the applicant has indicated, the move of that would only occur with the Denny's property owner's consent, essentially. So we're recognizing it's a good goal, but by modifying this condition, it takes it out of the requirement stage, and we still recognize it as a goal. Ultimately, I think we all would like to see that access moved, but we do recognize the control. So staff is supportive of this change.
Thank
Okay,
you.
and then the language that you wanted to add, are you comfortable with the language that, because I obviously didn't memorize that as you spoke it, because I want to make the motion, but I want to incorporate that language as long as Mr. Poirier is comfortable with that.
And I think the language is under 3A, after shall be provided by the property owner / developer, comma, subject to approval by Pima County, the City of Tucson, and ADOT as appropriate, period. New sentence, the developer shall not be required to modify driveway access from Oracle Road on the adjacent property to the west, and said access shall be considered a grandfathered existing condition. We're asking Mr. Poirier, is staff comfortable with that language? I believe that's what Supervisor Miller just asked.
Yes, staff is supportive of the change.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? If not, then I will move to close the public hearing C09-14-09 for the Lin Xiaorong and Chua Wu Revocable Trust West River Road rezoning, as approved with standard and special conditions, as amended with the language just read into the record by Chair Bronson, adding that to item 3A, and with the deletion of condition 3C, as approved with standard and special conditions, as voted on by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and as recommended by staff with approval of standard and special conditions.
I'll second. Any,
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Elias?
I am still concerned about the safety of people out there at that bus stop. If in fact, expanding the size of this shopping center is going to mean substantially more traffic, because that's a considerable number of square feet in that store, so there's a reasonable expectation there's going to be a lot of traffic there. Chris, you still feel comfortable that there's enough room there in front without moving that egress, or the ingress and egress that exists right now?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Elias, again, ideally that access point would be moved.
I understand that, but is it safe? That's really the question that we have to deal with. It's nice to speak in those hypotheticals, but I'm concerned about that.
I think what we are going to see here is certainly an improvement regarding the access along River Road.
Correct.
As that right turn lane will be expanded, greater cross-access opportunities. So I think, along River Road, I think we're going to be better off, and we're hopeful then that trade-off will ameliorate the pre-existing condition along Oracle. Again, with a long-term goal of getting that access point moved.
Understood, and I wouldn't feel so bad if it wasn't a bus stop there, because people who ride the bus are exposed to the elements in ways that pedestrians even aren't. So I just, have my questions about that. And I'm willing to go ahead and approve it because it's working right now as it exists, but we should have no illusions about the fact that we're bringing more traffic onto that piece of property due to the size of enlargement, and the scope of that enlargement to that shopping center. So it does make me somewhat nervous.
Any further comments? If not, I'll call the question. Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Moving on to item 22, hearing rezoning time extension for CO9-99-17, Alley et al. Oracle Road rezoning. And this is for approval of a 5-year time extension subject to original and modified standard and special conditions. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us on this item at this time? If not, this is a time extension. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor
I
Miller.
move to close the public hearing CO9-99-17 Alley et al. Oracle Road rezoning and approve a 5-year time extension for the zoning from suburban homestead to CB1 local business urban gateway overlay as recommended for approval subject to original and modified standard and special conditions by staff.
I'll second. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 23, another time extension for CO9-99-18. Staff is recommending approval of a 5-year timing extension subject to original and modified standard and special conditions. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us in opposition to this time extension? If not, what's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Miller.
I move to close the public hearing CO9-99-18 Alley Oracle Road rezoning and approve a 5-year time extension for the rezoning from suburban homestead to CB1 as recommended for approval subject to original and modified standard and special conditions by staff.
I'll second. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 24 and items A and B. These are hearings, CO9-04-16, St. Philip's Foothills LLC, Campbell Avenue rezoning. A is a rezoning closure that staff is recommending against, and B is a rezoning time extension, and staff is recommending approval of a 5-year time extension subject to original and modified standard and special conditions. Is there anyone? We have one speaker, James Davenport. Name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
James Davenport, and I'm the property owner to the east of the subject property. I support the rezoning time extension with a restriction. During the last 5 years, this property has sat vacant for 5 years. And this is after all the old 1920 buildings were demolished. In that time, we have seen wildcat dumping, cactus poaching, illegal drug use, and other suspicious nighttime activities. Since the 7 acres in question has vehicular access from Campbell, we believe that fencing and gates on the west side along Campbell Avenue should be required. If this property is to remain vacant, access needs to be controlled by the property owner. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the property owner or the applicant in the audience?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairman and Mr. Huckleberry and Vice Chair Elias. My name is Kelly Lee and I'm representing the applicant. I'm from the Planning Center. He was here earlier this morning, but he had to leave on a work emergency. But I did hear the property owner to the east and understand his concerns. So I don't believe this would be a problem with the property owner to gate it or find some sort of
solution that'll prevent the wildcat dumping.
Exactly.
And the drug use. Part of that is obviously going to be, come under the purview of the sheriff's department, because there's trespass issues, and part of it with DEQ with the wildcat dumping.
Yeah, I've been unaware of this complaint until right now, so I'll speak with him and try to figure out a solution, especially with the dumping and the security.
So then I will leave it to you, I guess we'll leave it to you to contact the gentleman who just spoke and try to work out something that's amenable to the existing neighbors.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you. Supervisor Miller?
Madam Chair, with that being said, the neighbor's concern getting addressed, I'd first like to make a I'd like to move to close the public hearing C09-04-16, St. Philip's Foothills, Campbell Avenue rezoning, and deny the closure of the rezoning, and deny the closure of the rezoning. Subject to the conditions, subject to the original, subject to...
I think you just need to recommend against closure for this one and then moving on to recommend the
So I
5-year
move
time.
to, close the public hearing and deny the rezoning closure.
I'll second. Are there any objections to against closing? Hearing none, motion carries and the rezoning is not closed. Moving on to the rezoning time extension, Supervisor Miller.
Madam Chair, I move to approve a 5-year time extension for the rezoning of approximately 7.02 acres from CR1 to CR4 and CR4 restricted as recommended for approval, subject to original and modified standard and special conditions as recommended by staff, and close the public hearing.
A motion and a second. I'll second. Any discussion, objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 25, hearing rezoning ordinance number 2015-8, and then item 26, hearing rezoning ordinance number 2015-9. The first one is Supervisor Elias.
Seeing no one come forward, I move to close the public hearing and approve items 25, 26, and 27, including ordinances 2015-8, 2015-9, and 2015-16.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor
I
Miller.
call to divide the question for item number 27.
I remove my motion.
Just seconder. Okay. Well, then let's move on to item 25 and 26 in ordinance 2015-8 and 2015-9. What's the pleasure of the board?
Second.
Close the hearing. Motion and second to approve closing the hearing for ordinance 2015-8 and 2015-9 and items 25 and 26. Any objections? Hearing none. Motion carries. Moving on to item 27, hearing traffic resolution 2015-16. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Miller.
I had some questions on this item. I just was curious as to why, number one, we're bringing the roadway into Pima County when it is in very poor condition. And number two, why are we paying to bring a road that is in very poor condition to bring it into Pima County?
The roadway maintenance system, is that your question?
Yes.
Staff? Ms. Cornelio, Mr. Bernal, Mr. Huckleberry?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, this particular establishment is a short section of roadway that is lying in District 2, and the District 2 supervisor using Top 41 funding has indicated a desire to make improvements to that roadway to assist a community activity with regard to recreation. A private recreational facility has been built, and so it's appropriate that to spend public funds, particularly Dot 41 highway user revenue funds inside the city of Tucson, that first has to be established pursuant to state law, and that's the action you have before you.
So this is, these $24,500 is the money being used to actually improve the road? Okay.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Miller, yes.
Thank you.
For approval?
Motion and a second to approve. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, I object to the,
Okay, I'll call the question. If there's no further discussion, any objections? Supervisor Miller, you object?
yes.
One objection. Any further objections? Motion carries 4-1. Moving on to the addendum agenda, we've already dealt with the executive session item. We move on to county administrator. There are items 2, 3, 4, and 5, public safety retirement plans, quarterly report on collections. Well, let's take them one at a time. Let's move on to item 2, public safety retirement plans. What's the pleasure of the board on this one? This is regarding the Fields decision.
Madam Chair?
Supervisor
It's my
Miller.
understanding that as a result of that decision, we have to catch up with some funding for $5 million, and it's simply to ensure that we're funded on that.
So it's a housekeeping issue at
Yes.
this point.
So I'll move approval.
There's a motion and a second. Supervisor Elias seconding. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 3, quarterly report on collections. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve item 3. Objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 4, fiscal year 2015-16 budget hearing schedule. Staff is recommending approval. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair?
Supervisor Valdez.
I'll move the item and ask that it be placed on the county website so that our constituents know about the budget hearings and what the subjects are, as well as the schedule.
I'll second.
Madam Chair, I just had a question on the hearings. They're 15 minutes each, and it appears, is this the time that we are allowed to ask questions during those 15-minute hearings?
No, that's the presentation. We ask questions after the presentation.
Okay, it appears that some of these meetings are going to run more than 3 hours long. Okay, that works. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't being cut off after the 3 hours. Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? There's a motion on the floor. Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 5, grant funding from the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs and resolution 2015-17. What's the pleasure of the board? Supervisor Carroll.
I move the item in resolution number 2015-17.
Second.
Motion and a second. Objection? Supervisor Miller.
I just had a question regarding whether I didn't see any documentation in the background material from Davis Monthan, a letter from them requesting that we purchase this land. I didn't see anything from them, so I was wondering if we have that available.
Mr. Huckleberry.
Yes, Madam Chair and Supervisor Miller, we've had a number of discussions with Davis Monthan personnel in the area of where we have actually been with them with regard to their planning for Davis Monthan and its missions and future missions and its operating and maintenance costs. And they have indicated on a number of occasions that yes, they would like the county to take whatever actions are necessary to assist them in acquiring these leased properties from private individuals as well as the state trust land in order to reduce their annual operating costs, which would then place their base in the order of preference with regard to future base missions, reductions, and closures higher than others. So yes, there's been a number of verbal requests. We can, in fact, and I think this actually requires a letter from them in support of the application.
That was my concern, is that the rules regarding this application did require a letter, so you are going to.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? There's a motion on the floor. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 6, under contract and award, community development and neighborhood conservation. Catholic Community Services, DBA St. Elizabeth's Health Center, amendment number 1. What's the pleasure of the board?
Second.
Motion and a second. Objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to hearings, franchises, license permits. This is a fireworks permit for Skyline Country Club on April 4th. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us on this item at this time? If not, I'm going to move we close public hearing and approve the fireworks permit. Second. Motion and a second. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 8, procurement, a hearing solicitation, Northwest Community Park, improvements at Rito Regional Park. A is appeal of procurement director's decision, and then B is the actual award and is unfinished business from 310-15. Mr. Redegris.
Madam Chair and members of the board, solicitation 168053 resulted in the receipt of 10 bid responses ranging in value from $2,231,000 to $2,899,000. The engineer's estimate was $2,900,000. The low responsive and responsible bidder is Durazo Construction in the amount of $2,238,661. Pima Paving is appealing the dismissal of their protest. Their protest was dismissed because it was not timely. All of their arguments were premised on alleged errors and omissions in the bid documents. This should have been apparent before the bids were due, and as specifically stated in the procurement code, should have been filed before bid opening. But even if their protest was considered timely, there was no factual evidence supporting their claims. The assertions that they made were speculative. To address the disparity between the low bid amount and the engineer's estimate, we contacted Mario Durazo, president of Durazo Construction. He confirmed that he could stand by his bid. This was also again reviewed by the project manager and assistant county administrator, and we feel that this is the appropriate recommendation to be made. And that concludes our report.
So, if I understand you correctly, you want us to deny the appeal and award the contract to Durazo, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. We do have the appellant here, Reggie West.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And you have 3 minutes.
Okay, Mr. Huckleberry and board. One of the biggest concerns I have is just looking back at past awards of low bids, and I know Mr. Whitakeris is saying that Durazo is saying that they'll stand by their price, but they'll stand by their price because they have subcontractors doing almost all the work. If you take out the amount that their subcontractors are doing and their administrative costs, they have less than 10% skin in the game themselves. So they're at the assumption that their subcontractors will be able to cover this. I would like to know what the 2.9 million estimate that their office has, what are their bare costs? Because I know my bare cost, Granite's bare costs, Clear Contracting's, Falcone, I've talked to all of them, their bare cost is higher than Durazo's bid. If we look back at what happened with Select Contracting, one of their subcontractors forgot or didn't know that it was going to be Davis-Bacon wages. Because of that, they were going to have to pay their people $55 an hour to do work. This isn't a Davis-Bacon job, but if you look at the way purchasing put this one together, there's no line items. No subcontractor is going to be able to come and cry and say, I didn't know there was 10,000 feet of curb or whatever the numbers are. It's just flat lump sum, lump sum, lump sum, lump sum, and you're going to have subcontractors potentially in trouble just like on La Canada. And then the county's going to be sitting wondering what's going on. There'll be all kinds of problems. And we're concerned because, like I said, does somebody know what the bare cost of your $2.9 million budget was? Because I know my bare cost and the 60,000 force account comes more than Durazo's cost.
Thank you, but the issue in question in terms of the appeal is that it wasn't timely. Your appeal.
My appeal wasn't timely?
Yes, that's what Mr. Whitaker's just.
I think I can even protest again 5 days after award. So I'm timely.
That's not what Mr. Whitaker's indicated. Mr. Whitaker's?
Madam Chair, members of the board, section 11.20.010B basically states that pre-bidding protests regarding the solicitation that are apparent before bid opening or before the time for receipt of proposals shall be filed before bid opening or before the time for receipt of proposals.
But his question to you was he still feels he has 5 days afterwards to appeal, and your response is?
I believe that would be more than 5 days past the notice of recommendation for award.
So he filed his appeal more than 5 days after. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. He did file his protest after the bids opened, which means that that was not in conformance with the procurement code. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the code right here, and it says that protests filed more than 5 days after the protester knew or should have known the recommendation of award, or after contract award. So even 5 days after award. So 5 days after today, you'll have another protest.
Mr. Whitaker's?
That's right.
Madam Chair, members of the board, if you continue to read that, it does say that protests filed more than 5 days after the protester knew or should have known of the recommendations for award, or after contract award, shall be considered untimely.
Thank you.
Is that what you said right there?
Yeah, it says more than 5 days after. And it's not 5 days after award yet, unless I missed something. Did I miss something?
Madam Chair, members of the board, protests are intended to be made within 5 days after the notice of recommendation for award. That's the key time period that is typically used when we have protests and protest appeals. In this particular case, the Pima Paving had actually filed an appeal after they should have known of errors or omissions in the specifications, and the procurement code specifically calls out that such protests shall be filed before bid opening. So there are two different provisions in the code for protests. The one that results in his protest being dismissed is because of the errors and omissions he perceived existed in the specifications, and they were apparent prior to the receipt of bids, and that's when the protest should have been filed to be in compliance with the procurement code.
That's when the protest was arrived. So you're saying if we were to award the bid to Durazo today, Mr. West could not appeal that decision?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Miller.
I'd just like to ask Mr. Whitaker to address the allegations that they might overrun and get us into the same sort of situation as Selective. I know those are purely speculative, but I would like to ask you, are you comfortable that the bid is within reason, that we're not going to end up in another?
And to piggyback off of Supervisor Miller's question, I know Durazo we have awarded a number of contracts to Durazo in the past. Have there been problems with those contracts?
Madam Chair, members of the board, no, we're not aware of any problems that we've ever had with Durazo. They've always been a fine contractor. We've used them quite often. In addition, out of the 10 bid responses, 5 of them were clustered not too far from where Durazo came in with their bid amount. The reasons for that, I'm not sure. I think that sends a message that everyone did submit bids that were somewhat in conformance and were all competitive. I do know that our project manager did take another look at this, and you might want to direct a question to Nancy Cole on that.
Madam Chair, I didn't get my question answered. I asked if you're comfortable with the bid as it sits, that you're comfortable with DeRosa's bid and you're comfortable that they're going to be able to perform the contracts based on your estimate of the cost. Is it, you know, the bare cost, as Mr. West pointed out, are we comfortable that this contract is going to be able to be performed adequately given the bid? I have the background information that we've done business with DeRosa Construction, and it appears they've been successful in their contracts, but I just want to ask the question one more time. Are we comfortable that this contractor is going to be able to perform the work in a timely manner and be able to get the work done so we don't end up in a situation like we had with Select Development?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Miller, based on the information that I've reviewed from our Assistant County Manager as well as our Project Manager, as well as the bids being in conformance. Clustered, yes, in the same area. I feel reasonably good that it should be able to be done according to the.
So your answer is
provided.
yes?
So yes, our answer is yes.
Long way around.
And the other side of it is, I don't know that we have any legal basis to do otherwise, because we did find them responsible and responsive. So I think that could be challenged if we found it a different way.
Thank you. Mr. Huckleberry, did you have a comment?
Madam Chair, members of the board, we actually looked at the concerns that were expressed on their call to the audience the previous week, and I provided some material to the board yesterday with regard to the project manager's analysis, the bid tabulation analysis, as well as the market conditions and the bidding environment that we've been in recently. And I think those documents all point to the fact that I think we are comfortable with awarding this contract to DeRosa Construction.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I may just state something else along with that.
Briefly.
It's all nice that you're comfortable, but contractors go broke, subcontractors go broke. People get out of jobs.
We can say that about every contract we award.
Well, but just hear me just a moment, please. Just entertain me for a moment. They talk about this cluster of bids down here, and in this business, if you were to look, every one of those contractors in that 2.2 range is going to be using the same low bid subcontractors. And the way the bid was arranged, there's many gray areas in there, and if it was a small contractor bidding, and many of them are bidding this tight, like you said, the economy's tight right now. So what's going to happen is every one of those guys are bidding to all of these guys. All those subs bid to those same generals. And every one of those have no skin in the game. They're all there with a pickup and a man and a briefcase, and they're not doing any of the work. If you look at the cluster up on top, we're doing 40, 50, 60% of the work, and we're not marking up somebody else's work. Now, how did we all end up there where the illustrious engineer's estimate is too, and somehow they figured out that their 2.9 is okay.
Mr. West, your time is up.
Okay, well, their 2.9 is okay, and they were just going to get rich, I guess.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to clarify Mr. West's concern with Mr. Whitaker's. Is it within the confines of the rules that they're allowed to use subcontractors to bid on these types of contracts?
Always.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Miller, absolutely yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Miller. Any further questions? If not, what's the pleasure of the board on item 8A? Supervisor Carroll.
Madam Chair, I'd like to go ahead and move
To deny the
item
appeal.
8A to deny the appeal of the procurement director's decision.
Motion and a second to deny the appeal. Objections? Hearing none, motion carries. On to item B, an award to DeRosa Construction. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair, I'd like to close the public hearing and award the unfinished business to
The unfinished, the contract.
the contract of solicitation 168053 in the amount of $2,238,661 to DeRosa Construction.
Motion and a second. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. That brings us to the end of today's meeting. And if there are no objections, this meeting stands adjourned.
Good, how are you doing?
Good. Life is good, Jim didn't come take me out or what?